may signify.
Welcome back to The Explainer. Today, we're diving straight into a brilliant piece of microfiction called The Bred Box. You know, if you really want to get the full effect of this one, imagine a deep, resonant male voice narrating it. It just completely sets that suspenseful, unsettling atmosphere we're about to walk into. We're looking at a spatial descent here. It's a story that literally drags us from a normal, everyday city street down into a claustrophobic nightmare, relying on absolutely nothing but the environment. So, let's just jump right in.
Look at how the source material starts. Down around 14th and 9th, an alley between a parkade and a small office building. What's wild here is how incredibly grounded it is. I mean, we aren't starting off in some creepy haunted mansion, right? We're at an intersection you could literally pull up on Google Maps right now in almost any major city. 14th and 9th. It's specific, it's mundane, and by wedging this alley between a parkade and an office building, the author makes you feel boxed in by towering concrete from the very first sentence. We're visually trapped before the story even gets going.
All right, moving into stage 1, the desolate downtown alley.
This perfectly highlights the core anomaly we're dealing with. Think about it. A normal downtown alley is alive. You've got traffic dodging the main roads, teenagers hanging out, transients finding shelter. Alleys are kind of like the hidden veins of a city, usually pumping with the overlooked elements of urban life. But down here at 14th and 9th, it's a total ghost town. It's completely desolate, which honestly makes absolutely no logical sense. The text clearly points out the loading docks and parking spots. There's infrastructure meant for human use, but the space itself is just a void.
This unnatural silence is what makes it so unnerving. Let's look at what's actually missing. There are 0 cars cutting through to beat traffic, and let's be real, in a gridlocked city, when does that ever happen? No teenagers looking for a quiet spot, no transients, literally no one at all. The author is doing this really deliberate pacing trick here, peeling away the normal layers of city life one by one. And as those elements vanish, the silence just gets deafening. The absence of life becomes an active, threatening presence. You know how humans have that instinctual radar when a place just feels off? Yeah, the total lack of people in a space built for people screams that this alley is fundamentally broken.
Which brings us to part 2, Winter's sensory warnings. Now, the narrative hones in on these incredibly chilling sensory details that only pop up during a specific time of year. So walk through this with me. Step 1, you're heading down this desolate alley in the dead of winter, and the cold just instantly isolates you. Step 2, bam, you're hit with this absolutely visceral, foul smell of rotting meat. Step 3, you start picking up the distinct skittering sounds of rats coming from a dumpster right next to you. And then, step 4, morbid curiosity takes over, and you actually look inside. See how the text completely weaponizes your senses? It uses the freezing cold, that horrific stench, and the audio cues to just crank the tension through the roof before you've even laid eyes on anything.
I actually want to pause on this exact phrase for a second. Here's sounds emanating from it that sound like rats. Notice it doesn't just say you hear rats. It specifically says you hear sounds that sound like rats. That little shift in phrasing? Absolutely terrifying. It immediately plants a seed of doubt. Are they really rats? Or is it something else? Something just mimicking them, scratching around in the pitch black of that dumpster. I mean, in an alley where literally no living person ever goes, what on earth could possibly be feeding on rotting meat?
Let's look at stage 3, the mint condition paradox.
So you look inside, and nothing. The dumpster is completely empty. There's no meat. There are no rats. Just let that sink in for a moment. You were just gagging on the overwhelming smell of decay. You literally just heard the audio of scratching and scurrying clear as day, but the physical reality you're looking at totally contradicts what your senses just told you. It's an impossible space. The real horror here isn't some monster jumping out at you. It's this dizzying, stomach-dropping realization that reality itself is literally warping inside this desolate alleyway.
But wait, consider the single object that is inside, the anomaly itself. The Bred Box. The text spells it out specifically, a plain tin receptacle of a kind not manufactured for decades, yet found in absolute mint condition. Why a bread box, right? It's the ultimate symbol of everyday, mundane, safe domesticity. It belongs in a sunny 1950s kitchen. To find it sitting at the bottom of a freezing, phantom-smelling dumpster in a dead alley is just wildly out of place. And the fact that it's in absolute mint condition, flawless, unblemished, despite being totally obsolete, is a dead giveaway that this thing does not obey the normal laws of time or decay.
And that leads us directly to the final descent, 2 secrets and a lie.
Right here, the narrator shatters the fourth wall and speaks directly to your survival instinct, which you should never do under any circumstances. The author drops this warning with absolute dead serious gravity. It is the literary equivalent of a massive flashing neon "Do not enter" sign. This whole explainer up to this point has been a descent, step by step, down the street, down the alley, into the dumpster. And the final step, opening the box. The text is literally begging you not to. But, human nature. If a box is closed, we absolutely have to know what's inside. If you do open it, you will discover that it contains your own severed head. Just let that chilling revelation stand completely alone on the screen for a second. Talk about a massive subversion of expectations. You don't find a demon or a ghost or a weapon. You find you, dead, staring right back at you from inside a vintage tin box in an alley that shouldn't even exist. It creates this sudden, brutal time loop or reality fracture. Because think about it, if your head is in the box, who is the one looking into the box? But the horror doesn't stop with the visual. It immediately spirals into this twisted psychological game centered around the number 3. According to the text, your own severed head is going to speak to you right before it finally expires. And imagine the sheer terror of that audio, hearing the deep, resonant, perhaps failing sound of your own male voice, or whatever your voice sounds like, echoing up from the tin. It's going to say exactly 3 things. 2 of them will be secrets, dark, terrible truths about your life or the universe that literally only you could know. And 1 of them will be a lie. Which drops us into this final, inescapable puzzle. Picture yourself standing there in the freezing cold, that ghost smell of rotting meat still in the air, listening to your own voice echoing from the bottom of that box. If you heard those 3 statements, how would you possibly know which one was the lie before the head expires? If it hits you with 2 devastating, absolutely true secrets about yourself, how do you possibly guard your mind against the one lie it sneaks in? Because that lie, it would haunt you for the rest of your life. It's just a brilliant, inescapable trap meant to shatter your mind. Take a second to think about what secrets your own mind might tell you in that alley. Thank you so much for joining me for this explainer.
Welcome to This Explainer. Today, we're diving into a seriously unsettling piece of internet folklore called He Waits for You. Now, what makes this story stick with you isn't your standard monster hiding in the closet. It's all about how it engineers this profound, inescapable dread. We're going to break down how the author uses sensory deprivation, really leaning into audio, the crushing weight of silence, and a terrifying male presence to build the ultimate trap. Let's get right into it. The story throws you right into a sensory nightmare from the jump. Picture this. It's a bleak winter night, and you're lying alone in an empty bed. But notice the specific auditory cues being used here to lock in that feeling of isolation. It isn't just quiet. You hear the winter wind literally crying against the window, an ambulance siren wailing somewhere way off in the distance, and then the terrifying echo of gunshots. The horror here is entirely driven by sound, or more accurately, having absolutely no one around to convince you that you didn't actually hear those sounds. The audio environment going on outside basically magnifies how totally vulnerable and lonely you are inside. And this brings us to why the narrative feels so incredibly invasive. Notice how the author never says, "a man walked into a motel." Instead, they use you. By writing the whole thing in the second-person point of view, the story drags you, yes, you, directly into this isolated space. You're not just passively listening to a scary story happen to some random person. You are the active participant here. It's like the author is whispering right into your ear, making sure every cold draft and every single terrifying sound is happening exclusively to you.
Section 1, The Midnight Ritual.
So how do you get from a quiet bedroom into this surreal nightmare? Well, you follow a highly specific set of instructions. It mimics that classic internet horror trope of a ritual. First, you wait for midnight and a hidden moon. You close your eyes, hold your breath, and take only what fits in your pockets. But the real kicker is the final step, driving far away from civilization until a dense fog totally consumes your car. The text is super clear here. As you hit that fog, the audio cuts out entirely. You hear absolutely nothing. The author is methodically guiding you step by step away from the familiar soundscape of your home and plunging you into this unnatural, suffocating stillness. Once that fog finally lifts, you find yourself at a dimly lit, stranded motel. And guess what? There is no one else there.
The absolute pure silence of this place just cranks your anxiety through the roof. No traffic sounds, no other guests, nothing. You grab a solitary key from the front desk, wander down the hall, and lie down in a room that is freezing cold and deathly still. You are completely alone with the silence.
Section 2. A grotesque embrace.
Now, the story expertly shatters all that freezing isolation by giving you something totally unexpected: warmth. You're lying there, hugging a pillow, when the sensory experience suddenly shifts. But as you open your arms, this horrifying realization hits you. That warmth? It's his arms. Two twisted, mutilated arms tracing down your body. You aren't alone. There is a male entity in the bed with you. And what's really heartbreaking, but also deeply unsettling, is that you realize this creature is just as frightened and lonely as you are.
Just listen to how this male ghoul is described. He has blackened spherical eyes that twinkle with this weird otherworldly light. His neck is totally bruised with deep finger indents, almost like he's been strangled. His skin is literally flaking off onto you, and his legs are crooked, broken, and healed back together completely unnaturally. Yet he sighs softly, caresses your face, and weeps these small, glistening tears. It's brilliant because it builds this visceral, tactile horror. His battered form gives you this messed up mix of profound pity and absolute terror. He's a monster, sure, but he's also a victim of some agonizing torture who just desperately wants to be held in the silence.
Section 3. The rule of escape.
Despite how incredibly sad this creature is, the story suddenly drops a massive life-or-death ultimatum on you. You can spend the night with him, and he'll completely submit to you, knowing nothing you do could possibly hurt him more than the isolation he's already endured. But there is one absolute rule. You must leave before sunrise. If you don't, you're trapped living his exact existence forever. When you actually try to get up and leave, that heavy silence breaks. This pathetic figure does everything in his power to stop you. He grabs at you, crying, screaming. You have to fight through this intense auditory assault of his screams. Force yourself out, lock the door, and escape that doomed motel.
Section 4. The aftermath.
So you wake up safe in your own bed. You brush off the whole harrowing ordeal as just a really bad dream. And wouldn't you know it, shortly after, you meet a new male partner who seems absolutely perfect. Let's compare these two figures for a second. On one side, you have the hideous, lonely ghoul from the silent motel, mutilated, weeping, terrifying. On the other side, you have your flawless new partner back in the real world. He's wonderful, comforting, and literally everything you've ever wanted to sweep away your loneliness. You fall in love and you completely forget about the motel and the ghoul. Your isolation feels permanently cured.
Section 5. The auditory terror.
But of course, the comfort of this new relationship gets completely shattered by a creeping auditory escalation. Let's track the audio here. It starts at point 1 with peaceful silence. Then, at point 2, as you're lying in bed, you hear a faint scratching at the door and a cry that sounds way too familiar. The next night, point 3, that cry turns into a full-blown, horrifying shriek. By point 4, the scratching is a deafening pounding. But here's the absolute worst part. Only you can hear it. Your male partner completely dismisses this auditory nightmare, totally gaslighting you and telling you to just go back to sleep. And then, at point 5, the screaming and pounding abruptly stop. Dead silence returns. And in that returning, suffocating silence, we get the ultimate twist. You look over into your lover's eyes and you notice a new glow, twinkling with the exact same light of another dimension. That perfect male partner you brought into your home, the guy who told you to ignore the sounds at the door, he now has the glowing eyes of the ghoul. The story comes full circle. The monster didn't actually stay locked in that motel room. He literally waited for you, and he found a way into your reality, wearing the face of the person you love.
So, as we wrap up this explainer, I want to leave you with one final thought to chew on. Which is truly worse? Enduring the absolute freezing isolation of an empty bed surrounded by nothing but silence, or being loved unconditionally by a monster wearing a familiar face? Think about that the next time you hear the winter wind rattling your window at night.
Welcome to today's explainer. So today we're unpacking the mechanics of a truly terrifying narrative, a story called I'm Not Martin. If you're a fan of R.L. Steen's acclaimed show The Haunting Hour, you might recognize this one. And let me tell you, it is an absolute masterclass in psychological dread. We're going to track exactly how the author traps our main character in a total nightmare of mistaken identity, step by agonizing step.
I want you to think about something for a second. Have you ever been punished for someone else's lie?
Just keep that in the back of your mind as we go. It's a deeply relatable fear, isn't it? Just that awful feeling of profound unfairness, of desperately trying to explain yourself while literally nobody listens to you. Well, that is the exact psychological stage this story sets. And honestly, it's what makes the impending horror so incredibly effective. We aren't dealing with vampires or monsters under the bed here. We are dealing with the sheer terror of having your own identity stolen and actually used against you. Right off the bat, the story drops us into absolute chaos. Picture this. You walk into a hospital room and immediately hear a frantic boy screaming at the top of his lungs, "I'm not Martin! I'm not Martin!" You've got two nurses physically struggling to calm him down. They pull the privacy curtains around his bed. One of them is holding a massive syringe. The other is prepping his arm. The kid is fighting for his life, but eventually the screaming stops, the curtains pull back, and he's just lying there, completely unconscious. It is a highly distressing, chaotic opening scene that tells us right away something is very, very wrong here. Now, the setup here is brilliantly deceptive. It's the end of October. Our protagonist, a kid named Sean, is super bummed out because he's missing out on picking a Halloween costume and hanging out with his friends. Instead, he's stuck in this hospital ward. And notice the setting. You've got these lime green hospital walls completely covered in festive orange and black streamers, white skulls, paper pumpkin heads. It creates this incredibly eerie contrast. You have the innocent, festive fun of Halloween slapped right on top of the cold, clinical dread of a medical facility. It's just a brilliant way to unnerve the audience right from the jump. So let's break down who we're actually dealing with here, because we have a really stark contrast between our two central characters. On one side, there's Sean. And Sean is, well, he's basically just bored and annoyed. He's in the hospital to have his tonsils removed. A super minor issue, but he's complaining about missing Halloween. On the flip side, we have the boy from that chaotic opening scene. The nurse actually reveals his horrific reality to Sean. He's scheduled to have his left leg amputated in the morning. This kid is so absolutely terrified of this life-altering surgery that he's desperately trying to convince the hospital staff he isn't even himself just to escape it. So Sean, obviously curious and kind of weirded out, asks the nurse, "Hey, are you sure you have the right person?" And her response is absolute. She says, "Of course, his name's Martin. It's right there on his chart." This right here, this is the chilling clue, the smoking gun of the entire narrative. Notice that the nurse doesn't say, "Oh, I know him," or "his parents confirmed who he is." She points directly to a piece of paper. Her complete reliance on that physical medical chart, totally dismissing the frantic, screaming words of the patient himself, establishes the terrifying rule of this hospital. The chart is God. All right, let's map out how the rest of the day unfolds, because the pacing here perfectly ratchets up the tension. Late afternoon, Sean gets admitted and his parents head home. Evening rolls around and he's served this absolutely disgusting hospital dinner. He can barely stomach a few bites, which just adds to his whole miserable vibe. Then we tick closer to 10 p.m., which is lights out on the ward. And looming ominously at the very end of this night is the ticking time bomb, that scheduled amputation surgery for the next morning. Every single hour that passes pulls Sean deeper into a trap he doesn't even realize exists yet. Later on, as Sean is just lying there, completely bored out of his mind, staring at the ceiling, his roommate finally wakes up. Sean, trying to be a nice guy, introduces himself, and the boy responds with this exact phrase, "I am not Martin." He just groans it out while rubbing his head. Sean tries to keep the conversation going, but the boy is totally irritated and refuses to say another word. He just sits up in bed, silently brooding. It's such bizarre behavior. I mean, if you were waking up from a sedative, wouldn't you just say hello? Why stick to this strange, repetitive insistence? The tension really hits a peak right at 10 p.m. A nurse comes in, cheerfully tells him it's time to sleep, and reaches for the lights. But just a split second before the room goes totally dark, the author plants a final, terrifying seed of doubt. Sean notices the other boy staring at him with this really odd look on his face. It's not just a casual glance, you know? It's this loaded, deeply unsettling stare right before the lights go out. It leaves both Sean and us, the audience, feeling incredibly vulnerable in the pitch black. So yeah, unsurprisingly, Sean does not have a peaceful night. His sleep is completely haunted by strange, fragmented dreams. And this brief little detail is actually a classic horror pacing tool. It brilliantly bridges the gap between the eerie, quiet setup of the night and the absolute nightmare of the morning, keeping that suspense at a steady boil. The author doesn't let us relax for a single second. Even in sleep, the dread is just suffocating. And then, morning hits. Let's walk through the exact steps of this terrifying morning mistake. Step 1.
Sean wakes up with a jolt to find 2 adult doctors physically looming over his bed. Step 2, one of the doctors casually says, "Let's go, Martin. It's time for your surgery." Step 3, Sean, groggy, confused, and suddenly panicked, insists, "What? But I'm not Martin." He starts frantically trying to explain that they are making a massive, terrible mistake. And this right here perfectly illustrates the horrific, dramatic irony of the whole story. The other doctor just sighs and replies, "The nurses warned us about you. They told us you'd say that." Man, it is absolutely chilling. The real Martin's earlier panic, his frantic screaming that he wasn't himself, all of that has now been completely weaponized against Sean. The doctors totally dismissed Sean's desperate pleas because they fully expected their patient to lie to get out of the amputation. Sean's honest truth sounds exactly like the lie they were prepped for. Sean is literally screaming at them now that they've got the wrong dye, that he is definitely not Martin. And what does the doctor do? He just reaches out, checks the medical chart hanging at the end of Sean's bed, and says, "Of course you are. It says so right here on your chart." This is the brutal payoff to that clue from earlier. The terrifying realization just washes over you. Human logic, pleading, crying, literally none of it matters. The ultimate unquestionable authority in this hospital is that piece of paper at the foot of the bed. And that single piece of paper has just sealed Sean's fate.
That's not right, Sean screams. Somebody must have switched them. And boom, right there, the narrative trap snaps entirely shut. That odd look before bed, the weird brooding silence, it all makes horrifying sense in this exact moment. While Sean was sleeping, or maybe while he was just distracted in the dark, the real Martin crept out of his bed and quietly swapped the medical charts at the foot of their beds.
Things escalate incredibly fast here. The pacing just goes into overdrive. Sean starts physically struggling. I mean, he is fighting for his leg, he's fighting for his life, but he's just a kid up against 2 grown-ass doctors who are totally convinced he's just a hysterical patient. They easily overpower him, they physically hold him down, and they force him into a straitjacket. The sheer powerlessness of this moment is just visceral. He is completely restrained, entirely stripped of his agency, shoved into a wheelchair and wheeled away against his will, all while still screaming his innocence. As he is being rolled out the door screaming, "I'm not Martin, I'm not Martin," to a hallway full of medical professionals who simply will not listen to him, we get the final, ultimate gut punch twist of the story. The very last thing Sean sees before those double doors swing shut is the face of the real Martin. And Martin is smiling. It's this incredibly dark, triumphant smile of a boy who has just successfully condemned an innocent kid to a horrific fate, all just to save his own skin. It is a masterful, deeply, deeply unsettling conclusion.
So I want to leave you with this final thought. If a piece of paper said you were someone else and the entire system absolutely believed that piece of paper, how would you prove them wrong? I'm Not Martin takes a total staple of childhood fears, the dreaded hospital visit, and brilliantly layers it with these really mature, terrifying themes of medical errors, loss of identity, and just absolute powerlessness against a bureaucratic system. It makes you realize that sometimes the scariest monsters out there aren't the ones hiding in your closet. They're the ones holding a clipboard. Thanks for joining me for this explainer, and hey, always keep questioning the narrative.
Do not come any closer.
There is no escape.